This is Drawn to Darkness, a bi-weekly podcast where two best friends on different continents discuss our favorite dark and dreadful media. I'm Annie. I'm a high school English teacher in Australia, and I'll be sharing my favorite horror novels, short stories, movies, and podcasts with you.
And I'm Caroline, her friend in America, and I'll be doing the same mostly from the true crime side of things.
So we're going to get straight into it today and talk about the book Penpal, which is arguably the most horrifying of horror novels, possibly that I've ever read. Up front, there will be spoilers. So if that's a problem, I'd say stop listening now, go read it. It took both of us about 48 hours to read. It's very gripping, and then come back and listen. So like with my English classes that I teach, I have to forge ahead on the assumption that my students have actually read the book, whether that's true or not.
Yeah, and I do actually participate in a lot of things without doing the homework, but I wouldn't suggest that in this format because we're not going to be recapping. We're going to be discussing.
So, Caroline, have you ever had a pen pal?
My best friend from growing up, who was my neighbor, moved to Saudi Arabia in third grade, and I wrote with her for maybe a few months. But I've also never been great at compulsive work. I wouldn't have elected to do something like that as a child, for sure. How about you?
Well, I think I did something in primary school like the characters in this book, but I actually think the only time I've ever really had a pen pal was with you because we used to send each other postcards. So, yeah, as far as I know, you didn't go on to stalk me, which is what happens to the narrator of this book. So, this is the blurb about Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. A man investigates the seemingly unrelated, bizarre, tragic, and horrific occurrences of his childhood in an attempt to finally understand them. Beginning with only fragments of his earliest years, you'll follow the narrator as he discovers that these strange and horrible events are actually part of a single terrifying story that has shaped the entirety of his life and the lives of those around him. If you've ever stayed in the woods just a little too long, if you've ever had the feeling that someone or something was trying to hurt you, if you remembered the first friend you ever made and how strong that bond was, then Pen Pal is a story that you won't soon forget, despite how you might try. So basically, quick recap is this book is about a little boy in kindergarten who's involved in a pen pal project where they send a balloon with a picture of them. Is this a good idea? I don't think so, but this is what they do, into the air. And then the idea is that they see who gets it. And then they start up this pen pal relationship. So the kids are excited. They can put pins in a map. But unfortunately, our narrator ends up attracting the attention of the worst psychopath possible, who then stalks him at least well into when he's a teenager. He's living under his house. He attempts to kidnap him. And ultimately, he kidnaps and murders his best friend in one of the most horrifying ways possible. So that's what this book is about.
Also, not a great idea to do balloon releases in general. Like
Terrible for the environment.
We're beyond that.
Yeah. But I think
Right?
this was the 90s. We didn't know.
Okay.
Caroline, how did you feel about this book? You know I loved it. I recommended it. It's the second time I've read it, but this is not necessarily your jam.
This was rough. I will say some parts of the book were very reminiscent of my childhood because I grew up, actually, my backyard was the end of the nature preserve in our town. So I spent a ton of time in very deep woods. So those scenes were nostalgic. And I also had a single mom. There's no mention of this kid's dad at any point. So there were some things I related to, but then most of this book, I spent my time questioning the adults involved.
Yeah, let's get into that. We might as well start with setting. Like you, this all rang very true to me. I lived in a boarding school, so there were woods everywhere, and me and the other campus kids just spent a lot of time in the woods. We thought there were kidnappers there. Obviously, we totally made that up, but in reality, I have a super sad hometown murder. You might know it. The Brendel family was murdered by Christopher Hightower in my town when I was, I think, in fourth grade. And the entire family was buried in those woods that I played in. So that was a real fear for me, even though this was not a random murder. The family knew the perpetrator, but we all grew up knowing that a little girl was buried in those woods. So
For sure.
Very scary for me.
Yeah. And most murders are people who know the victims. So
Which is very unlike this. Let's talk about how this novel came about because its origins, I think, are quite important. It was a creepypasta. Have you ever encountered any creepypastas, Caroline?
There's always oh, this was a town that flooded, and when it gets really low, you can see the windmill, and nobody knew the town was going to get flooded.
I love a sunken town story. Those are the best.
It's like a million in New England. Every reservoir supposedly was a town at one point.
Yes.
So, yeah. And of course, like the flashing headlight story and stuff like that. But
Urban legends. I've also heard about the Slenderman story where people read about that and it actually resulted in somebody getting murdered in real life. I don't know that much about it though.
yeah, I don't know that I had that many more that I can think of.
So Dathan Auerbach was on Reddit. He came up with this idea, and that is, I think, both what makes it so dreadfully creepy, but also not hold together entirely as a story because he didn't have a plan necessarily when he wrote that first post. So we'll get to criticism later, but I think that speaks to where the story falls apart, but at the same time, what makes it awesome. Either way, I love that he did this. I'm an aspiring writer myself. I love a publishing Cinderella story, and this is a great one that someone could start on the internet on Reddit and just become this absolute cult classic for horror lovers. And arguably, it's in the literary tradition of some of the most famous writers we know, like Charles Dickens wrote his novels in an episodic way. But it does mean that things don't necessarily wrap up neatly in a cohesive way. Marilyn, what adjective would you use to describe this book?
Fucked.
Fact. Yeah.
Can I swear?
Yeah.
I don't know if we're bleeping that, but this is the word I would use.
Yep. I was thinking unsettling, dreadful, grim, and at times sickening, right? The final story is sickening.
Definitely sickening. Yeah, for sure. I don't think it's a hot take that regret is the worst emotion that you can have. There's no way to fix what you've done or whatever that makes you feel that way. And it's just, it's nauseating and you can't undo the things that have occurred because of your actions. So yeah, for sure.
Well, regret brings us to the discussion of the themes of this novel. I also think it's about memory, the nature of memory, the fallibility of memory.
I thought the memory aspect of this was interesting in some ways, was very accurate about how tousled and piecemeal pictures that your life can be in your own mind. But some things about, I was sort of like, I really can't imagine that he would come across this shark floaty and not know exactly where it came from and have an immediate association of that. That was one piece of the memory thing that I was like, there's no way that that wouldn't have occurred to him when he comes across in the beginning, when they come across it and there's the spiders.
And that's because it's a creepypasta. I think these stories were written separately, and then it's like, ooh, there's a connection, the shark floaty. But it doesn't hold together if you actually stop and think about it. And there's a lot
For sure.
like that in this book.
Yeah.
In terms of the theme of friendship, though, I absolutely loved the scenes between the narrator and Josh. I found them really authentic, endearing, which made what happens to Josh ultimately so heartbreaking and so unfair.
Yeah.
I loved the selling snow cones.
Yeah, and even before the end with Josh, when their friendship dissolves and he doesn't seem that interested in figuring out why or preserving it in any way. It's sort of like he sees the hot sister and makes him remember this amazing friend. I don't know, that was a little disappointing, I guess, from the perspective of the main guy.
But that's real. I think about my childhood absolute best friend who moved to, I think, South Carolina when we were in 4th grade. And I think I've had 2 Facebook posts with her since in the past 30-something years. And she was so special to me. And that does happen when people move.
It does, but they stayed in the same town. They just, they lived in the same town, just went to separate schools. Like my friend who moved to Saudi Arabia, we did not stay in touch. But my friends who lived within a 40-minute radius of my house, we certainly did.
But I found that with my own children, like certain kids that, for example, when they were 5 or 6 years old, they were best friends. And then, they go off to different schools and that's it. We make
Yeah.
comments about how we're going to keep the friendship going, but often you don't. So I feel like that was very sad but real. But yeah, I mean, I just loved the way they are so devoted to making that map. And the scene where they can't stop laughing because they're looking for a flashlight. And Josh says
Yeah.
something along the lines of, wouldn't it be great if we had a flashlight? And
Yeah.
that, I mean, I've had moments like that with you where I can't stop laughing. And I just
Yes.
found that so real, which really makes the contrast between those moments that are so real and so endearing with those moments of pure dread and horror. And that makes them all the more powerful. And then in terms of memory, I think one of the messages is that forgetting is a gift. Right? There's certain things you don't want to remember. And
Oh,
it can
yeah.
be very traumatic when those memories come back. Be careful what you wish for, because I think the narrator would be better off if he hadn't put it all together.
He'd be better off if a whole lot of things hadn't
Yes.
or had happened.
Now, you wanted to talk about the mom. She's a single mom. Is she doing her best? Did she do enough? I think it's pretty
No.
easy to criticize her. What do you
No.
think?
No. No. Unequivocally no. So
Okay.
first of all, not just the mom, but also the teacher. I'm sorry. Every other kid in that class got like one letter. The second place person was like 5, and it was like 50. And they're all creepy Polaroids with no words. And the teacher just hands that over to the kid. I don't know why it wasn't flagged immediately as something is off here. So first of all, by the school and the teacher, but second of all, the parent who sees that, if the teacher didn't, the parent would immediately be like, this is not cool. I'm angry.
Yeah.
And then also as these other things occur, I cannot, I mean, I'm a person who in America, you can have guns in your home. And when my children are going to have a play date with a new child, I always text the parent and I say, we have 2 dogs and a cat if allergies are an issue. And just to let you know, there are no guns in our house, because I just feel like it is appropriate to ask in this country. Children do find guns and dangerous things can occur. So if I'm just like, first play date, I need you to know every danger that might occur. I can't imagine my child has a stalker and I don't tell the best friend's parents anything about it.
Are you judging her from the perspective of a 2000s parent, though? Like, I think she's probably, 80s, 90s is my guess. I don't know. A lot of this felt to me like 60s, 70s free range that these children had. I had free range as an 80s kid, but I don't think I was so free range at 5, 6. That's very young. So at first I kind of felt like the setting was earlier than it actually is. But then when they talk about the movies they're watching later on, I'm like, no, this is 80s, 90s.
They have a cell phone. They're younger than us because we didn't have
Yeah.
cell phones in high school. So
I do think we have to take into account her financial situation. There's a point where their phones are getting turned off. I think they're living in housing that perhaps is public housing. I don't know. But I'm guessing that their financial situation was not great. So it's difficult for her to get out. And she did make that effort eventually to leave where she knows her child is being stalked. But yes, I think you're absolutely right criticizing her for her lack of communication, both with the child and other parents.
Well, yeah, I don't think the child necessarily needed to know at the age that those children are, but the other parents should be made aware. If you are so in danger that you're relocating completely, you're not going to inform the child who's attached to your child 24/7, you know?
Because that child's in danger too, for sure.
That was another thing that I was confused about when they moved suddenly and then they went back and the house is vacant. And I totally hear you about the financially strapped and all that stuff like that. Then how did they afford to move to another place without selling the place they were in?
My guess is she didn't own it. I don't know. Again, this is the creepypasta details.
Then she couldn't have left all their crap there if she was renting, you know, and also the landlord would have gotten a new tenant. I don't know.
So why isn't anyone living there? For the sake of the plot. Like, that's the only reason. So that we can have that super, super duper scary scene where we find out later on, guess what? Our bad guy has been living under the house while you lived in it, most likely going upstairs, moving you around, taking you into the woods, and is still there. And apparently has photos of you all up in your old bedroom and your old clothes. Can we talk about the psychology of this motherfucker? Because he is messed up. I mean, seriously, what is his deal?
It's quite odd, these time leaps between his
Mm,
activity, you know, to your point about memory and the creepypasta aspect of it too. I find it hard to imagine that he was dormant for
mm.
as long as he was between the last incident and running over Josh's sister, you know?
I guess my question is he actually dormant? We've got the balloons launched into the air in kindergarten. Then we've got a lot of activity around age 5, 6, the incident with the 4 stamps dollar coming back, the Polaroids, and then it seems like he goes dormant. But I think we can assume he's not. He's living under the house. He's stalking them in the woods. And then they move, and then it seems like not much happens until they go back to the house to look for boxes. This cat, that also broke my heart. But the implication is he's been living in the house the whole time. Just because he doesn't get caught doesn't mean he's not still there. And I guess when he ultimately runs over Veronica, it shows us that he perhaps was always there. He'd never stopped watching.
Which also seems unlikely now that I think of it.
Yeah.
Like,
Again,
if the
plot
mom was
does not
talking to
hold
the
together.
police, yeah, about a stalker, and then this house would be
And
an obvious hiding spot, especially when the next door neighbor turns up dead.
yeah. And I think the other question is, why did he take the narrator out of bed, bring him into the woods, put him down, and then let him go? Because he's a kid, he's like a baby. He's like 6 years old at this point, right? So
Yeah.
did he experience regret and realize, oh, I don't want to go through with this, but then worked himself up to do it later on? Because we know he does it to Josh, right? Josh supposedly runs away, but there is a note on Josh's pillow, just like there was a note on the narrator's pillow saying he's run away. But this time, he doesn't let him go. So again, what's the psychology of that? Does that make sense other than for the sake of the story and having these mic drop creepy moments?
Yeah. So for me, unequivocally, no, it doesn't make sense. But also, you just reminded me of another aspect of the parenting critique. I thought it was so odd that the mom was freaked out. She's like, "You left this note, and I called the cops, and you disappeared, and here's your note." The mom didn't notice he didn't spell his name right. That's so confusing to me.
Unless he has a history of not spelling his name right. But yeah, I mean, really, that's the first thing kids
Right,
learn.
but he would have disclosed that. I mean, from all accounts on
Yeah.
his side, he's a total nerd. I think he was spelling his name perfectly with
Yeah.
perfect cursive. I do think that, however disappointing the behavior of every other character is more realistic. I think that the mom's not letting people know, however much I disapprove of that, I don't necessarily think that it's unrealistic that
Hmm.
people might be embarrassed, ashamed, or just not think it's that big a deal. And like all these other things, even if I have a critique about how I would have acted, I do think it's realistic. The bad guy, though, just doesn't seem, it's because of all the gaps in between. And as you said, he makes this one attempt and there's never any other kind of abduction attempt or anything like that. I feel like he might try to work himself up to it multiple times and fail or something like that, and then finally go through with something.
And when he does finally go through with it, it's with Josh, who is just in the narrator's periphery, which speaks to your point about the mom. She should have told his family. It's tragic. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about various scary moments. What do you think was the scariest moment for you?
The scariest moment
Hmm.
was definitely when they were on the boat and they heard hello. Because I just think about myself in the woods, and I was often in literally the woods, no one with me. If I heard a
Hmm.
voice, I think I would have soiled myself.
I absolutely love that scene too. The way they start saying hello and all these silly voices to break that tension, and you start to think it's all okay, and then hello back. Again, I think that's the genius of this book. It's not the plot, it's those moments that just strike to the heart of terror. That is definitely on my list. Another one is the stamps dollar coming back, the 4 stamps dollar when they, so then you know you have sold to that man. He was there, right? Creepy. And then boxes,
Yeah.
when boxes meows on the walkie-talkies, that kind of kills me because I don't think it ends up okay for boxes.
Oh, nor do I. Although that was another moment that I felt like was very unrealistic because I live in a downtown area. My child, when he was much younger, he was becoming independent during the tail end of COVID. So we were letting him bike around and stuff in ways we might not have otherwise because you couldn't do much else. And we always gave him walkie-talkies. And there is a very clear sound from a walkie-talkie. My husband likes to off-road and stuff. He gets fancy walkie-talkies. So like we have good quality ones. You can still tell there's not a cat under your bed. It's coming through walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
You know when it's coming through a machine. But I did feel horrible hearing because I've always had and it's sad.
A scary aspect we haven't really mentioned, although we've alluded to it, is just the fact that he's living in their crawl space for God knows how long. And is there anything creepier than that? Someone living in your house when you don't know. It reminds me of that Spider-Man of Denver. You probably have read about that or listened to a podcast about that at some point.
Totally.
Yes, you're a true crime fan. I know you would.
And all the frogging people, if people don't know, is the term for people who secretly live in your home, in the walls, in the roof, in the whatever. It's called frogging. I don't remember why, but
that's weird. Weird thing to do.
That is really weird. I can't even fathom that. Like, I just have never lived in a house where there was space to
that you know of.
We're from New England, right? So these are bare bones homes. The Puritans put this up with slab and there's newspaper in between. There's not room for a human. But in other areas where they're more, I don't know, late 1800s, early 1900s, there's depth to those walls.
I mean, it is one of my favorite tropes, a hidden space in a house. I love it.
Totally.
Well, I think we've already talked a lot about criticism, and I think most of our criticism stems back to the fact that it's this creepypasta formula, and it's a compilation of loosely related stories. But I still think I love this book. It's the second time I've read it, and it's because of that setup where you're like, this is normal, followed by this spine-chilling twist of something benign. But then again, if you look at it in detail and start asking questions, it all falls apart, right? Another thing that I think falls apart is how did he get Veronica's phone, right?
Yeah.
Veronica is dying in the hospital. Did he go into the hospital, go into her purse, take that phone and not get caught? It's possible, but it just doesn't make sense.
One more thing. There is no way on earth that the girl that everyone is in love with, that other people are sitting next to a friend of the brother at lunch or whatever, just to get inroads with her, that she in high school is going to be available on a Saturday night to go out on a date with the dorky, younger ex-best friend of her brother who ran away. Not realistic.
No, that's a male fantasy over there. Yeah.
And then also, I have to say personally, there are scenes where everything is normal, but the context of the whole storyline is not normal. It is not normal for someone to send 50 Polaroids to a child whose balloon you caught. And it is not normal for that dollar to then end up in your hands. And it is not normal for your mom to discover a man living under your home. There's so many aspects of it that are not, but I do think I agree. It's very Stand By Me where when you're experiencing it, you're like, this is really authentically what it's like to be a child of this age with your friend of this age.
Absolutely.
And then something horrific occurs in the midst of it. So yeah, I totally agree about that.
The other question I had is, how does our narrator not know that Josh ran away? People talk.
And his mother wouldn't have said,
you would have heard.
There's no way that a kid in my entire town would have run away and everyone wouldn't know about it.
No. I mean, if they'd moved to an entirely different city, maybe, but he's clearly still crossing paths with people from his old school. If he's crossing paths with Veronica, I just feel like he would have heard. It couldn't have been a mystery for several years that Josh was missing and he wouldn't know. Yeah. One other question I had. How did he get out of that house without the mom waking up? I don't know about you, but since I've had children, I will wake up at a cough or somebody rolling over or getting up to go to the bathroom.
I had a single mom who had a lot of anxiety as well. Our cats were forced to sleep outside. because if the cat moved around in the house, it woke my mom. So I agree. I can't imagine being a stressed out single parent. You've also already seen 50 Polaroids have come back. So you're a little creeped out in the first place. I can't imagine not waking up when someone is carrying your child out of there.
Or switching him from the lower bunk to the top bunk. Yeah. No, doesn't make sense. But
totally. Wait, and did you say you have a stalker story?
Oh, yes, I do. I traveled overseas for a bit and I was living and working in Greece. And I worked at this hotel that was, I don't know, at least a mile or two walk down a long, deserted, hot and sunny road. And this man would drive by and he was on a scooter. And once he offered me a ride and I took it because I was, 22, 23 and completely invincible. And I hadn't gotten into true crime yet. So I didn't know the possible repercussions of making a stupid decision like that. Obviously, I am here talking to you right now. I'm fine. But he started to get creepy. He wanted to date me. And for a while, it was fine. But then I wasn't interested in him. And then he started to call me. And there was one moment where I was sitting on the beach with my friends. And he called me and he said, I can see you. And I'm looking around, being like, where is this guy? I know he's here, but I couldn't see him. And that was, yeah. I mean, again, nothing, it fizzled out after that. Nothing like this. He never harmed me in any way, but it was very creepy.
That is creepy.
Yeah. Did you say your mom had a stalking story as well?
There are a few things, like I came home one day and the front door was open and I was a latchkey kid, so I was the only one home, but the front door was open and I called the police and they came and nobody was there or whatever. And then there was something else about a VHS that had come in the mail that I still to this day don't know what was on it, but I only found out about VHS after. So like maybe 2 weeks after the front door was open, I was sleeping over at my friend's house. Kids, if you're listening to this, back in the day when we had house phones, you would have to call your house phone, put in a code to listen to your messages. And I was sleeping over at a friend's house and I was trying to listen to the messages and somebody was leaving messages of the song I'll Be Watching You.
Eek.
So it's just literally like I checked the voicemail and it was just the song. I'll be watching you. And there were like 3 of them. And then I called my mom's cell phone and I was like, what? Somebody's calling, leaving these messages. And she didn't tell me what happened that night. When I came home the next day, she informed me that she had a stalker, that he was leaving videotapes in our mailbox and letters in our mailbox, and he might have been involved in our house being open, and that he was the one who probably left those messages. I don't know what happened after that, but everything was over.
So I think that really speaks to the horror of this novel. And one of those things is the disconnect between parents and children and what parents think their children need to know and what they keep from them. Because we know not just from Penpal, but from true crime. What was that show? Dirty John, which is based on real life, that being in the periphery of someone who's being targeted can be dangerous. And you were in that periphery. And what else didn't she tell you? And, this mom in Penpal is keeping things from people, just like your mom. And again, what's the psychology behind that? Is it shame? Is it fear that people won't want to be around you if you admit to this? But people do keep secrets. And when you don't know what's happening, perhaps you are in greater danger.
1,000%. Yeah. Yeah. As I was sharing that story, I was like, oh shit, my mom didn't tell my friend's parents that she had a stalker. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't my stalker, it was her stalker.
But her stalker could have used you to get to her. I mean,
totally.
That happens.
Yeah.
So I think it's that, what do you tell, what don't you tell a child in the interest of keeping them safe? Are you actually protecting them? And I think that is something that parents deal with all the time. I think the other real horror is just that fear that you could be noticed by a psychopath, the randomness of that. And that's, I think, the plot point of having the balloons and that red balloon. It's got to be a Stephen King It reference, right? That it just went to the wrong guy. And that changes everything. And that's scary because,
Yeah, totally.
So how would you rate this in terms of the dread factor, how scary it is? Could you read this alone in the dark with no one home?
I would just say it's more for me like after I've read it. I needed media. You know, I absolutely had to be listening to actively podcasts the whole time I was going to sleep because I couldn't stop thinking about the ending. And like, there's so many combined elements of my biggest nightmares that happen at the same time in that ending. I think the rest of it was more fun. Yes, it's horrific to think about what happened to the cat, but I read that and I was like, ooh, creepy, you know, whereas the ending was much more sure.
I mean, what happens to Josh, we basically have to imagine that he's been kidnapped and has been living with this sicko for several years. He's given ether and is somehow buried alive in a way that doesn't make sense, but he wakes up to this man lying on top of him and he kills him somehow. I think Josh bites him, so the man dies, and Josh dies slowly, being crushed by this man. And it is just the most horrific death I can imagine for a teenage boy. And it just makes me so sad, and it's so gross.
Yeah.
By the end. Yeah. And I think the dread in this is not so much in the experience of actually reading it, but in the aftermath and the way it sticks with you. Because what happened to Josh is horrific.
And his parents, I just kept thinking about his parents. Both of their children are dead just because of the proximity to this other kid.
I know. Terrible.
Both.
All right. We've discussed together in the past the idea that people who are drawn to darkness, whether it's true crime or horror, are interested in it because of anxiety, right? That we have these deep-rooted fears. And by watching this stuff, it kind of lessens that anxiety. It's like you're rehearsing what you would do in this situation. So the question I want to ask you is, what do we learn about survival from this book? How do we dampen those anxieties that we have? You've said this book combined a bunch of your greatest fears. So what do we learn?
I completely appreciate and understand having questions about what to communicate to your children about what type of things that may or may not be age appropriate in your mind, in someone else's mind, etc. But there's no reason to not engage another parent. That was the thing that kept me frustrated with the mom. And also my major takeaway was, if there's a situation that my child is in that could endanger another child, that child's parent needs to know. And if that means they look at me a different way or whatever, you know, better than that, than their child be a victim of something.
And kids, PSA, if something creepy's happening, tell your parents. Because I think he kept stuff from her too, right? That kid world versus adult world and not being able to recognize the red flags. Let's see. I think also we need to talk about being careful about putting your child's image out into the world. And it's something a lot of us do on social media without a second thought. But I have always had this really dark thought when I see people put their first day of school photos up where it's like, my age, maybe there's a uniform. And if the wrong person happened to see that photo, the chances are slim. But what's to stop them from going to that school, watching your kid come out and get into a car and following you home? I know that's paranoid. And the reality is that most children are victims of people they know, but it still makes me nervous.
I mean, I understand there's an element of, especially, you know, you're on the other side of the world from a lot of your family. My husband's family is abroad. There's a lot of it that's posting for family to see stuff. But at the same time, I've been doing a lot less of it for sure, you know, as I become more concerned about things like that.
Yeah. Let's see, what else? I think if you have a pen pal, make sure they're in another country so they can't stalk you.
Also, let's have better vetting system than you happened on a balloon.
Yeah. Yeah. Make sure they've all had their background checks. And
yeah, when I worked at a nonprofit that facilitated communication between donors and children, every single person was given a background check before they were allowed. So we wouldn't accept the money. They would be canceled immediately. Yes.
And maybe stay out of the forest. Let's give a little My Favorite Murder quote.
I don't know. I'm of two minds on that, you know?
No, I love the forest.
Because I love the forest, and we camp in above ground, air controlled, like tented thing with a toilet and everything, you know, like I'm not a down and dirty camper. So I have, you know, like you can go to the forest, but like have your mace with you.
Okay. So we don't have to stay out of the forest entirely. Okay.
Yeah. Enjoy nature with your mace.
That's great advice. Okay, one of the last things I want to talk about is what you should read if you like this. If you're looking for a more literary pairing, I would recommend Exhalation by Ted Chiang. There's a short story in there called The Truth of Fact, The Truth of Feeling, which is just amazing. And it's about, I guess, that cognitive dissonance that we need to make sense of the world and the stories we tell ourselves, because we're all the main character in our own story and what our brain chooses to forget to make ourselves the character we want to be. So it's just a really interesting story about memory. I would also recommend the No Sleep podcast if you're looking for more Reddit style creepypastas. And then a great book, The Last House on Needless Street, is also about a serial killer who's psychologically messed up. There's a kidnapped kid, and there's even a cat. So if you liked this, try The Last House on Needless Street. And finally, if you want to hear an interview with Dathan Auerbach, the author of Penpal, there's an interview with him on the podcast, The Connor Smith Show. I'm sure there are others, but that's just the one I came across. And you can hear him talk about Penpal, his process, and his newer book called The Bad Man, which is about similar themes. Carolyn, do you have a palate cleanser? You mentioned that you needed to listen to something else or watch some other media to get your mind off of this. What would you recommend if you have engaged with this book and are feeling sickened and creeped out?
Well, first of all, number one, I'm a big TikTok fan. I find so much joy in the silliness that is on TikTok. So in general, my palate cleanser every single night is TikTok. My For You page is mostly full of animal situations and also trends. So what I was really enjoying this past week was Will Smith and Tatiana Ali did a reenactment of a scene from I think it's the second episode technically of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but it's the first after the pilot was accepted. So it was like the first real episode for them. And she's listening to headphones and dancing in her bedroom, and he comes in behind her and she doesn't see him, and he starts mimicking her, and then she turns around and sees him, and they're doing it to the song Anxiety, the like newer song Anxiety. So that's been really fun to watch that, and all of the people. I mean, one of my favorite thing about TikTok is all the takes on what becomes a trend audio.
All right, we will add that to the show notes. Well, it's time to wrap up. So in 2 weeks, we'll be back here with another discussion of something dark. Caroline, what true crime dark media would you like to recommend?
So what this kind of reminded me of is Sweet Bobby, which is a docuseries. I can't actually remember what streaming service it's even on, but
At least in Australia, it's Netflix.
Okay, yeah, I think you're probably right. But Sweet Bobby, which I think there was also a podcast about, but it is a great docuseries, and it has to do with sort of the intensity of a stalker. And I find what is quite baffling about the lengths people will go through in service of their obsession.
Okay. Well, you've got 2 weeks. Go off and watch Sweet Bobby. I will do the same. Thank you for listening. Please do all the things that podcasters ask you to do. Tell a friend if you enjoyed this. Give us a review on iTunes. Like and subscribe. And if you are like us and like Shirley Jackson and you delight in what you fear, join us again in 2 weeks at Drawn to Darkness. Special thanks to Nancy Azzano for our cover art. You can find her on Facebook at Nancy Azzano Art, and Harry Kidd for our intro and outro music. You can find him on Spotify.